everyone, it's Charlene. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to be making a Father's Day card today with this adorable stamp set, the I Love Dad stamp set, and then I'm going to be using the coordinating dies as well as the coordinating stencil. I'm also using the A2 nested pendant dies as well as the border dies that work for a slimline card, the number 9 ones. So let's get started. I'm making an A2 size card today, so I'm starting out with a card panel that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm doing some heat embossing. So I used my anti-static powder tool, and then I used some clear embossing ink to stamp out the polar bears. I've used some black embossing powder, and now I'm coming in with my heat gun to melt all of the embossing powder. You also could do this with ink, but I have chosen to use embossing powder because I am doing a technique with the stencils where I use some glitter gel. And I find that the embossing powder, once it's melted, it makes it a little bit easier to clean up the edges of my stenciled image that has the glitter gel in it. And it will make a little more sense as you see me do it. So I'm starting out here with the glitter gel. I've taped down my stencil. This is a brand new container, so I'm just making sure I get it nice and mixed up. And then I have some on my spatula, and I'm just bringing it down from the top to the bottom. I tend to stick with one direction most of the time. I find that makes it a little bit easier to get a smooth and consistent finish. So I make sure I have it all over the entire stencil area, and then I smooth it out by holding my spatula at a slight angle. And if I do happen to get any little nicks or patches where maybe the glitter gel pulls up, then I just kind of go in and pat a little bit more of the glitter gel in. Once I'm done, I can go ahead and clean my stencil as well as my spatula. I'm peeling this up, and this pixie tape from Thermoweb works so well with stenciling. It does not stick to the paper at all, but it holds my stencil in place, which is awesome. So now I'm coming in with a little weeding tool that I have, and I'm just kind of cleaning up the borders around my stencil area because I want that little nose and some of the edges. I want the black to be more noticeable. This is certainly a personal preference thing, though. You absolutely do not have to do this. You could put glitter gel over the top of the embossing powder or even over the top of ink, and as long as it is translucent, you are still going to see those lines through there. I'm going to be doing a night sky slash kind of galaxy background. This is my go-to style when I am putting together a card with a night sky or a space card or anything like that. I always start with black cardstock, because then I already have the black built in. It makes it much easier in my opinion, at least for me anyway. And then I use some white pigment ink and kind of dot it and rub it around in a couple of different places. And then I am coming in with some Prize Ribbon Distress Oxide and some Villainous Potion Distress Oxide. And I'm just sort of putting it here and there around on the cardstock. No real rhyme or reason. I am just trying to sort of keep it spaced out and doing whatever I think is going to look nice. So once I have the two colors down, I'm going to come back in again with some more of the white pigment ink. Do note that you need to be a little bit careful when you're doing this, just because your colored inks can get on your brush and then you don't want to put it into your pigment ink pad and all of a sudden you have a purple pigment ink instead of a white pigment ink. So I just have a paper towel there so I can wipe off any excess ink that happens to get onto my brush in between. So super easy. Once that's done, I am using a little spray bottle that I keep around that I have Perfect Pearls in, mixed with some water. Now you could spray directly, or you could do like I'm doing here. I've just pulled out the sprayer and I'm tapping around so that I get little droplets all over the card. I've set that aside to dry, and now I'm coming in because my other polar bear has dried, and I've put the stencil back down so that I can do the smaller polar bear, the little kiddo polar bear. And I'm just dabbing in some of the glitter gel and coming in with my spatula to make sure I get a nice even coating there. It is a little tricky to try and get the same amount on each bear because you're doing them at separate times. So just try to kind of keep in mind the thickness level that you used on one bear and do the same thing on the other. I actually got a little bit more on my second bear than I did on my first bear, but I still think it came out all right. So now while that is drying, I am going to do the second part of my card background. And this is going to be a little hill that the two polar bears are sitting on as they look up at the night sky. So I used that kind of sloping border die to cut my cardstock, and then I use the same technique with the pigment ink and the two different colors of Distress Oxide, and I'm just doing it so that there's sort of a halo of white there in the center, so it looks like maybe the moon or something like that is shining down on the ground. So I'm not going to add any of the perfect pearls to this piece. So now I've got a piece of black cardstock, and I am using some anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp out some of the solid stars in embossing ink, and I'm going to stamp out 6 of them. Ultimately, I only use 5, but I like to stamp out maybe a little more than I need, just in case any of them, don't work perfectly or I don't die cut perfectly. That's been known to happen in the past. And in fact, on this set, one of them I didn't quite like the die cut, so it worked out just fine. Once I have my embossing ink down, I'm going to come in with some silver embossing powder, and I'm going to just make sure to get a nice coat on there, and then I'll use my heat gun to melt the embossing powder. Now these are going to be die cut. The stars in the set all have a little die to go with them. There's this solid set of 3 stars, and then there are 2 other star images in the set that also have coordinating dies in the die set that's sold. So all the different star options I feel like give you a lot of options for when you're making cards, because you can stamp or die cut and do all kinds of fun stuff. So I have stamped out my sentiment down there and heat embossed with white embossing powder. And now I am using the A2 nested pendant die because I really wanted to have a stitched border around my cards. I didn't have one that was just a rectangle, but this pendant die, which is really great for other things, also in a pinch like here can be used to create that stitched border. So you can see I have cut out the top piece and then I flipped it around and cut the bottom. So you're never going to see the little flag part of the pendant because my little hill is going to be covering up the top pendant. Hopefully that makes sense. You'll see as we go along. So now I've used some black adhesive foam squares to pop up my stars all around on that back panel. And then I have cut a piece of black cardstock that is about a 1/16 of an inch from the sides of my A2 card base. So the A2 card base is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then my black cardstock is about a 1/16 of an inch smaller all the way around. So now I've put down my background piece with some liquid adhesive as well. And I'm just going to make sure to get that straightened. And now I have that nice little slim black background around the night sky piece. And then I have a little white border around that as well. I think that adds a nice little touch of dimension and looks really pretty. So I'm using some of the black foam tape from ThermoWeb here, and I am popping up that front hill. And then I'm also using some black foam tape on my little polar bears who are all dry now, and I'm going to get them adhered on the card. So I want them to sit on the hill, so I only put the foam tape underneath the top parts of them so that I could pop that part up so that it would have some stability on the card. And then once I get it where I like it, I can go ahead and add some liquid adhesive to the bottom of the bears and make sure they are adhered well to the card. So once I got done, I realized that unfortunately my sentiment was just a little bit crooked. So I decided to go ahead and use some black cardstock and heat emboss the sentiment on there and then cut it out with one of the small pendant dies. And then to sort of step it up a little bit more, I decided to use this thin piece of silver cardstock, and I'm just gluing it around the edges of the pendant so that way it has a little bit of shine. When it comes down to it, it's kind of a happy mistake because I'm actually happier with this finished sentiment than I was with the one that was stamped on the card. So I guess everything works out. But we all make mistakes, and most of the time they are easily fixed. So don't stress out if you're making a card and you run into an issue. Sometimes it makes sense just to step away for a minute and come back to your card and say, you know, let's see what I can do to cover this or to move this or to add another color. There's usually something that you can do to fix things. So I'm coming in here with some of the black adhesive foam squares, and I'm going to pop this little pendant that I've got my sentiment on. I'm going to pop that right over the top, and no one except you guys will ever know that I had a crooked sentiment on there. So here's my finished card, guys. I really love how this came out. This is such a cute set. Please be sure to like and subscribe as well as hit that notification bell. And until next time, guys, happy crafting.